I'm speaking for Black American experience. Every time we have tried to band with everyone, literally, the whites come in and offer you all something and you leave us in the dust. I am not a racist person. I love everybody. But when it comes to success, I'm only worried about the Black American community right now due to the fact of if it was vice versa, everybody else would think of themselves. So we're starting to get the mindset you all have.
I've seen a few comments like this with, Asians and Black people fighting in my comment section. And honestly, it shows how little we actually talk about the history behind all of this. The tension didn't just magically appear, it was shaped by decades of laws, segregation, stereotypes, and political narratives that pushed our communities apart. When Asian immigrants first came to the US, they weren't allowed to live just anywhere. Segregation forced them into Black and brown neighborhoods because those are the only areas open to anyone who wasn't white. So Asians and Black Americans were physically close, but not always connected. Different languages, different histories, limited communication, misunderstandings grew out of that. Then in the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, the US created the model minority myth. The idea that Asian Americans were successful, quiet, and proof that racism doesn't exist. That stereotype was never meant to lift Asians up. It was meant to contrast Asians against Black Americans and basically say, see, like they're doing fine, why can't you? It was a political tool that built resentment and pressure on both sides, even though neither community created that narrative. At the same time, anti-blackness already existed in some Asian cultures because of colonialism, colorism, and Western media influence. And for some Black Americans, their only interactions with Asians were through local businesses, corner stores, nail salons, restaurants, situations that were transactional, not relational. That created frustration and stereotypes on both sides. But here's the thing, in both communities, it's only a small handful of people who are actually hateful or racist. A few loud, ignorant individuals do not represent millions of us. We can't let the worst examples define entire communities. We just have to stop letting fear, stereotypes, and misinformation talk louder than the history and solidarity we actually come from.
There's a new courage rising. More Asian American voices are speaking up, not staying silent, not looking away. They are calling out harmful stereotypes in their own communities and choosing justice over comfort. Some are even willing to uncover truths about their community that were once hidden, calling out bad behaviors and attitudes that people didn't want to talk about. They are bringing uncomfortable issues into the light, demanding justice for Black Americans because equality isn't a competition. When everyone rises, the world becomes better for all of us. Full credit to all creators featured in this segment. All right, let's get into it.
As an Asian American, I have never liked saying a problem is a particular ethnicity or is not a particular ethnicity. There is such a prevalence of Asian-owned and operated businesses that sell beauty products for Black people in Black neighborhoods that at this point, Asians also control distribution and manufacturing. And what that means is that in this context, Asians do hold the systemic power to deprive Black people of economic opportunity by preventing them from opening these businesses in their own communities. A prospective Black business owner can have secured financing, secured a property, and met all other licensing requirements, yet still not be able to open an account from a distributor because the distributors are Asian and they don't want Black business owners competing with Asian business owners. Now, this is something that is specifically East Asian. I've heard that Black business owners have better luck opening accounts with Indian distributors, and I would love to hear from people if this is true, because I would hope that it would create competition. Now, in case there are people who are thinking, I can't believe that in East Asian just said that she hopes that East Asian businesses are driven out, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I hope that competition can be created to finally dismantle a toxic dynamic that's been going on for way too long. Predatory businesses would be faced with a choice to either remain predatory and go out of business or become competitive and improve customer service, which is something that should have happened decades ago.
You ever wonder why you never seen Chinese restaurants inside of white neighborhoods? Like, why is there so many Chinese restaurants inside of black neighborhoods? I'll tell you the play that was ran against us. White Americans said, ain't no way in tarnation is you finna set up shop in our neighborhoods and make profit off of us good white folk. So we are going to send you over to them black neighborhoods and you can profit and build off of them. You can make their dollars and send it back to your people and build your economy and your society. And don't worry about it. That black dollar ain't never going to recycle into the community. They're always going to come back to us. So it's a win for you and it's a win for us. That was an agreement that Chinese Americans and white Americans made together to drain the black dollar out of black communities. Chinese communities was deliberately set up to drain us out of our resources so that we would continue to look and seek for help from every other nation and race of people.
My grandma, the only black people she'd ever seen were American soldiers in Korea. And to her, they were all part of the same group. And then when she came to America, all she knew about black people was, like you said, what she had seen on TV, what people had told her. And so she was very distrusting of black people. And I was like, how many black people are just like everybody else? Like, I go to school with black kids, like, and she was just like, oh no, they're very dangerous. I'm like, they're not. This is just what people wanted you to believe. But, what else did she know? You know what I mean? She's just this like, country girl from, uneducated and is told by everybody in power what to believe. My God is better. My people are better. My guns are better. So she's like, okay, well, all of these things are better. So I better side with the better side. Sad to say, but I know that there's anti-blackness very much so in a lot of Asian American communities. And obviously, unfortunately, anti-blackness is global. And I think like
it's a very long historical answer.
Yeah.
Some of it has to do with not being used to it. Okay, so colonization happened throughout the whole world when white colonizers took over Asia, Africa, all the other continents. And with that came the belief of anti-blackness that was instilled upon all of these communities. Now, once those colonizations ended, you were left with this homogenized community where they don't know anyone who don't look like they're all white, all Asian, all South Asian, whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden you fast forward to having technology and Western media, because again, controlled by whiteness, is pushing out this message of that black communities are gangsters, do this, they do that. And then that media gets pushed out into the world in the form of movies and TV shows. And now you take this homogenized community who has learned anti-blackness through colonization and stuff like that, on top of the fact that it's then mixed with people who are learning about these races for the first time through fictionalized television that is controlled by white media. And then you have this biased look. So when they meet black people for the first time, they're having to reconcile what they have been essentially brainwashed into thinking versus then trying to figure out what that means when they meet you and they're like, but you're not any of these things, which is the reason why you get a lot of people from Asia who are having to go through that discovery, and Asian Americans who grew up with that and know that those are things that are essentially propaganda, mind washing, to keep upholding this idea of, and instead of using the WS word, I'm going to say anti-blackness, because one is,
hand in hand, and they push this anti-blackness, then it's basically global propaganda.
In my research, I have found that anti-blackness is pervasive among Asian Americans, especially when they internalize the model minority myth. When Asian Americans adopt this belief that their racial group is superior to other racial groups because they have stronger cultural values in hard work and success, it's correlated to greater explicitly negative attitudes towards Black Americans. In my other research, I've done in-depth interviews with Asian Americans to really explore how the model minority myth shapes these beliefs, and particularly serves as a barrier to engaging in activism. So dear Asian Americans, let's break this cycle of silence about anti-Blackness within our community. We can use what privilege we have to engage in protests and rallies, but also in smaller spaces like speaking up in your family when there's an anti-Black comment made. Let's hold ourselves accountable to the ways that we're perpetuating systems of oppression, because nobody's free until everybody's free.
I'm gonna rant a little about Asians who want to be white so bad. I was having a conversation with someone the other day and she went to a gathering, right? These people are Asian, right? But there are two white guys. Someone brought the Malona ice cream. The girl, who's Asian, goes, "Ew, is it an Asian ice cream?" And then she'd make comments like, "I wouldn't know because I don't have an Asian friend." She made another comment that said something like, "This feels like a whole bunch of Asians playing with two super smart white guys, playing a word game." Some shit like that. It's so cringe seeing Asian people try to cater to white people. Asian people act like proximity to whiteness makes them superior. You can literally feel the energy shift when someone has internalized racism. It's this weird mix of embarrassment, superiority, and "I'm not like those other Asians" vibes. And honestly, it's painful to watch. I've seen it so many times. Some Asians act like the second they get a white friend group, they level up in the social hierarchy. Suddenly, everything Asian is cringe or weird or low tier. You know what's the funniest part? They'll distance themselves from anything remotely Asian like it's toxic, and then they will over cater to their white partners or friends. Do you hear yourselves? It's like watching someone actively shrink themselves to fit into a box that was never built for them in the first place. Look, I get it, alright? A lot of Asians grow up being praised for assimilation. A lot of us are raised to believe whiteness equals safety, opportunity, acceptance. That's literally how internalized racism works. Acting like being white adjacent makes you superior to your own culture. Acting disgusted at your own food, your own features, your own background. It's not about hating anyone. It's more about calling out a pattern that harms all of us. Because when you look down at your own identity, the world learns to do the same. So yeah, Asians who think being white makes them better, just know that the rest of us see right through that.
Actually, a lot of black people you'll talk to say they prefer the racism in China over back in the States. They perceive it to be differently because here they see it more as ignorance, whereas in the States it's more like hate, like people actually hate you. But in China it's more like, it's just different. It doesn't seem like they hate you. Especially when I speak Chinese, I can go almost anywhere and talk to people, at least in the places I've been so far, and people will kind of accept me, I guess. I don't know how else to explain that, but they won't be like, "Oh, get out of my store." They won't follow me around in the store and see if I'm trying to steal something. They won't, like, I don't know, be rude to me. Now, that's not the case for all black people. Again, I'm the Obama black, I guess, that Chinese people are more comfortable with.
Why are Asians the biggest minority that are so obsessed with being or trying to be accepted by white people? And it's not even just Asian Americans, but even East Asians in their home countries like China, Japan, or Korea, they all almost idealize having this pale figure. Listen, if you're an Asian like me, stop idolizing white people, stop obsessing over becoming white or having white friends or whatever it is. Be yourself, okay? Being Asian is literally not bad at all. It's probably the best minority to be quite honest with you. And stop putting white people on a pedestal and realize that you are destined for greatness. You don't need the approval of some majority.
I first became aware of my mom's anti-blackness when I started kindergarten, and it mostly centered around avoiding interactions with black people and not allowing me to be exposed to anything that she considered black culture. So if we were walking and she saw a black person, she would pull me closer to her. If we were in the car in a parking lot and saw a black person in the parking lot, she would make a point to lock the doors, and I wasn't allowed to listen to rap or Michael Jackson or Tina Turner. And she was hypocritical about that, because I wasn't allowed to listen to Cyndi Lauper or Madonna either. She would call it trash music and say that it was going to be a bad influence. But if it was a white artist, it was not racialized. It was only when it was black artists that it was racialized. And another thing that I think is kind of typical is, as a musician, there were a lot of black artists whom she respected and enjoyed, but she would always say that one black artist is the exception, the rest are bad influences. When I went to school, if I came home and said I made a friend, her first question would be white or black. And that drove me nuts, because in preschool, I dealt with a lot of bullying and discrimination because of being Asian, so it didn't make sense to me that she wanted me to turn around and do that very same thing to my black classmates, whom she knew nothing about, on the basis of their skin color. And when I wouldn't stay away from my black friends, she would resort to making up justifications as to why it was harmful for me. She would say they're going to hurt me and they're going to be a bad influence because they fight and they swear and they're not good students. And of course, none of that was true. And in my household, it was not physically or emotionally safe to voice your opinions, but about that I would, because it literally angered me. And then she would resort to physical violence. And that sealed the deal in my mind that prejudice is purely irrational, because none of her claims had any basis in reality, and that's why she had to resort to physical force. Unfortunately, I think that when parents resort to intimidation and violence to instill prejudice in their children, a lot of times it works. But I was very lucky because the principal of my elementary school was a Black woman who implemented a program called Students Educating Each Other About Discrimination. And that wasn't centered on racial discrimination, it was about discrimination in general. But in that program, we learned to have discussions about discrimination and to identify it and disrupt it. Which at that age just means if you witness discrimination, say it's discrimination and articulate how you know that it's discrimination. So from learning that very powerful tool at school, I was able to identify that what my mom was doing at home was wrong. Additionally, the principal was a Black woman, so I had a Black woman in a position of leadership as a role model. And in my school district, she wasn't a token. They really valued Black leadership from teachers to administration, guidance counselors, all the way up to superintendents. And so I was surrounded by Black role models who made me see that reality did not line up with what my mom was trying to teach me. The straw that broke the camel's back was sometime around the ages of between 7 and 9, I was planning a birthday party, and I told my mom that I want to invite my friend Keisha, which I knew was going to be an issue, but I thought I would try. And she said no, and I said, fine, then I don't want to have a birthday party, and she made me have the birthday party. So now that felt like that's not only cruel to me, but that's cruel to my friend Keisha, whom you don't even know because you refused to meet her. Shortly after that, we were walking in the mall, and my mom did this thing that she often did, which is she sees Black people minding their own business, and under her breath, she mumbles a derogatory term in Chinese for Black people. And I remember I pulled back on her hand and faced her, and I said, they are not doing anything. You don't know them. The next time you do that, I am going to go up to them, and I'm going to tell them what you said. And believe it or not, the fear of exposure by me actually made her tone it down, and she stopped doing that in public. Fortunately, my mom did not live and die that way. In later years, she came around to seeing and later openly admitting how wrong she was. In her older age, one of her best friends really was Black, and my mom admitted to her friend what her previous attitudes had been and why. And from those conversations, I was able to gain some insight as to what my mom's motivation was for her anti-Blackness. Because I think most people feel, since Asian Americans also are harmed by white supremacy, how does it make any sense for Asian Americans to be anti-Black? My mom spent most of her young life in Hong Kong when it was under British occupation, and then in the 1950s, she came to the United States when she was 16 years old. Generations before my mom, her family had been living in and doing business around Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Macau, which were French, British, and Portuguese occupied areas. So she was heavily indoctrinated into anti-Blackness in Hong Kong, where she had no exposure to Black people that would have shown her a different reality. And furthermore, what she was indoctrinated into is the idea that an Asian can elevate their status in white spaces by aligning with white supremacy, which includes aligning with anti-Blackness. So I think what my mom was doing with me is that from a young age, she saw that I was having a hard time as an Asian American assimilating, so she felt that if I associated with Black classmates, that would make assimilating into white spaces even harder, and she was concerned that associating with Black classmates would negatively impact my status in white spaces. Well, we all know with me that the outcome was I understand very clearly what spaces I want to be part of and what spaces I don't. So my mom was really proud that she was westernized. She was proud that she spoke English without an accent, that she was very well versed in European culture, and she actually looked down upon my dad for being what she called traditional and therefore backwards. Right, so where was my dad in all of this? My dad grew up in Taiwan, where he had no exposure to Black people, but he also had very little exposure to Western media. I think when he came to the United States, he was a bit uncertain around Black people because of the lack of familiarity and the slight media bias, but it only took a very little being around Black people to see that prejudice is irrational and that it serves a white supremacist agenda that he doesn't want to uphold. As I said before, in my household, it wasn't physically or emotionally safe to voice opinions that differed from my mom, so I do understand why my dad didn't speak up when my mom was being anti-Black. He had a hard enough time keeping my brother and I safe. However, what he would do is, when it was just my dad and I, he would make sure to teach me or give me resources about accurate Black history. So, for example, a lot of my mom's rhetoric surrounded musicians. So my dad would teach me about Berry Gordy, Chuck Berry, Marian Anderson, Jesse Norman. If the claim was that Black people don't value education, he would tell me about Black scholars, academics, and scientists, and so on. So that, in a nutshell, is what I was told at home behind closed doors. Yes, this is really important. Asian Americans were redlined from opening businesses in white neighborhoods because white people didn't want Asian Americans operating in their neighborhoods and didn't want Asian Americans profiting off of white people. But because the positionality of Asian Americans is weaponized to oppress Black people, Asian Americans were being given loans to open businesses in Black communities, even though Black people were not able to receive loans to open businesses in their own communities. And as I've said before, as a result of this, Black wealth is essentially paid out twice when it goes to Asian American businesses. Once when the individual pays for the goods or services, and then again when the Asian American business owner removes the profit from the community. Because usually people open businesses in their own communities, and this is mutually beneficial, where the business owner is making a livelihood off of providing goods and services to their community. And by being a member of the community, they're contributing and they're investing back into the community. This is an ideal situation, and that is not what happens with Asian American businesses operating in Black communities.
Let me know what you think in the comments. Consider joining my community by subscribing, liking, and sharing. It really helps YouTube recommend this video to a wider audience. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.